Paulus sang pendiri Kristen.
Iya, itu
Jadi
memang
sampai merinding bacanya nih. Bagaimana menurut Umi, siapa ini sebenarnya Paulus ini? Orang mana?
Ya.
Terus menurut pendapat Umi, siapa ini sebenarnya si Paulus ini?
Ketika Nabi Isa alaihissalam sudah diselamatkan oleh Allah, dengan tidak adanya Nabi Isa di masyarakat, ya, Kristen kemudian membuat cerita seolah Nabi Isa itu mati di kayu salib dan kemudian bangkit, begitu, dan kemudian dilanjutkan oleh Paulus. Paulus inilah yang mengklaim dirinya sebagai penerus Nabi Isa alaihissalam, padahal dia yang banyak mengubah ajaran Nabi Isa.
It is always good to hear from the other side, so to speak, on a subject where the other side may not hold the same position as you. A man who holds a different opinion to myself and other Christians is Dr. Bart Ehrman. Now, Dr. Ehrman is a source that Muslim apologists often love to use to try to show that the Bible has been corrupted, even though the Quran says it hasn't. Another attack that Muslims like to use is that Paul changed the message that Jesus brought and in effect started the Christian religion. It will be very interesting to hear what Bart has to say about this. Islamic apologists have been making the claim that Paul destroyed the message that Jesus brought and replaced it with his own. This claim probably started with Ahmed Deedat and has been copied by other Islamic apologists ever since. Probably the most famous being Zakir Naik, who seems to have got all his material from Deedat. Now, Bart Ehrman describes himself as an atheist, sometimes agnostic, and this has coloured his opinion about the Bible, particularly the New Testament, of which he is a scholar of. This makes this video from his own channel that I have taken the clips from on this subject very relevant. He is not likely to pull his punches or do the Christian faith any favours, so therefore, if he defends anything we believe, then that carries a lot of weight. So apologies for the poor quality of the video, by the way, but Bart was away from home at the time of the podcast and obviously had a very slow connection. I will put a link to the video down in the description below.
Why is it important to consider Paul's role in the formation of Christianity?
Well, this is, as a New Testament scholar, this is something I think about a lot, and that I've thought about for a long time, because there are a lot of people, not just New Testament scholars, but there are a lot of people who will argue that that Jesus didn't start Christianity, but Paul did. Famous people. Nietzsche thought this. George Bernard Shaw, who wrote, most people will be most familiar with him because he's behind Pygmalion. They won't know about that, but My Fair Lady. He's the playwright, brilliant, and he wrote a book. He wrote an essay once called "The Monstrous Imposition on Jesus," which is about how Christianity just really botched it by dealing with what Paul's views were instead of what Jesus' views were. And this became a very popular view for a while, and it still is, I think, that Jesus preached, love and mercy and forgiveness, and Paul taught blood and atonement and wrath of God being averted, and that the Christian church went with Paul instead of with Jesus. And so there has been kind of a Paul or Jesus movement on and off over the years, and it's a bona fide scholarly question. Is Paul the one who started what we think of as Christianity? Paul continued to think he was Jewish. He would have been aghast by somebody telling him he wasn't Jewish. Yes, he was Jewish. In fact, he was the one who understood Judaism because he knew that the Jewish Messiah had come. And he knew that the Messiah was not supposed to be somebody who came to destroy the Romans and set up a kingdom in Israel. The Messiah was somebody who was supposed to die for the sins of the world and be raised from the dead. That's what God planned from the beginning. And God planned for that message to go to non-Jews. This is how God fulfills his predictions in the book of Isaiah, that the whole world will, march to Zion and will follow the God of Israel. God's doing that. He's fulfilling that promise through Jesus. So Paul's the one who saw that. His view, he saw that, he understood that, he converted to believe that, but it was Judaism. This was true Judaism. This is what Judaism was supposed to be for Paul.
And Paul, you mentioned, saw himself as an apostle to the Gentiles specifically. And despite being Jewish himself and viewing Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, he made it very, very clear that non-Jewish followers of Jesus did not need to convert to Judaism. In fact, should not convert to Judaism, because that's completely missing the point.
Paul didn't invent that Christ is the way to salvation. And he didn't invent the kind of larger variant within that the death and resurrection of Jesus brings salvation. He created a variant within that variant, which is that Gentiles don't have to become Jewish. You don't have to be circumcised. You don't have to keep kosher. You don't have to keep Sabbath. Following the law of the Torah has no bearing on whether you're saved or not for Paul. So I wouldn't say he founded Christianity. I'd say he founded that variant of it.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. If the death and resurrection thing isn't obviously peculiar to Paul, is it something that shows up in Jesus' own teachings at all?
This is back to the difficulty I mentioned earlier, that if you look at the Gospels and you see what they say about Jesus, well, yes. I mean, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John all have Jesus predicting his death and resurrection. And there are indications, especially in all of them, that it's the death and resurrection of Jesus that make a person, put a person into a right standing before God, that they need, that somehow this death and resurrection brings about a right standing. And so the answer is, for the Gospels, yes. In the Gospels, Jesus does teach this. The question is, did the historical Jesus teach this? These Gospels are being written by people who believed that Jesus not only was crucified, but that he was raised from the dead. And because he was raised from the dead, they concluded that God must have raised him from the dead, which means that he was the one specially favored by God. And if he's specially favored by God, then why was he crucified? Is this what God does to the people he favors? He tortures them to death? That doesn't seem right. Well, so Christ, there was a reason. There's a divine reason for Christ dying, and that is that he died for the sins of others. I think as soon as the earliest followers of Jesus believed in the resurrection, they made that connection. This death mattered before God. This death was a sacrifice for sins. And so they're teaching that right from the outset. And they're teaching that for years before Paul even comes on the scene.
Did you catch that statement?
And so they're teaching that right from the outset. And they're teaching that for years before Paul even comes on the scene.
I want to make it clear that Bart Ehrman says other things in this video that Christians would strongly disagree with. I'm not trying to hide that fact, but what I have highlighted from this video is that Bart Ehrman did not, and I stress did not, believe that Paul started the Christian doctrine. He clearly believes that it already existed and that it existed before Paul came on the scene. And let's face it, he was persecuting it until he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. So I'm not trying to put words into his mouth, and if you watch the full video linked down below, you will see that. So where does this leave the likes of Didat and Naik and the claim that the gospel was invented by Paul? Well, much could be said in answer to this, but I think that Dr. Bart D. Ehrman has answered it sufficiently. The Quran says in Surah 3, verse 3 and 4 this: He has revealed to you, O Prophet, the book in truth, confirming what came before it. He revealed the Torah and the Gospel previously as a guide for people, and also revealed the decisive authority. Surely those who reject Allah's revelation will suffer a severe torment for Allah is Almighty, capable of punishments. Islam also believes that Allah's word is eternal and cannot be corrupted. Surah 3 says that Allah has revealed the Torah and the Injil, so in other words, it is his word. These apologists would claim that Allah will protect his word, but apparently not from Paul. Bart, it seems, is better at being a Muslim than these apologists. So on that thought, let me say thanks again for listening, and may God bless you all.